Most Christmases I have a large family gathering when lots of people come to stay. I remember a few years ago when my slightly wacky sister was determined that we should go out carol singing. I was nervous about launching my family on the unsuspecting neighbours, but my sister was not to be put off. We made lanterns, we warmed homemade pies up, we took musical instruments with us, and we decided to go round and sing to our neighbours, most of whom I knew very well and counted as friends. But it was cold, so we were wrapped up with coats and scarves and hats, so much so, I guess, I wasn't very recognisable. On hearing the carol singers, at least two of the neighbours who were clearly at home simply refused to answer the door, perhaps fearful that we were asking for money. Another neighbour did eventually emerge, half open the door and tried to put some money out through the gap in what appeared to be an attempt to get rid of us as quickly as possible. It was clear he thought we were just a nuisance and more or less said so until in frustration I whipped my hat and my scarf off and he recognised me. He was visibly mortified when he realised who I was and started apologising. As we returned home that cold Christmas evening, I saw myself and my neighbours in a new light, living in our secure homes, locked away, with room for our families and friends, but with so little space for anyone else. On that first Christmas morning, Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem, but the town was thronged with visitors and all the homes and hostels were full. They travelled around, seeking somewhere to stay. Do you have any space for us? But as St. Luke tells us, the only warm, dry place they could find was in a stable, because there was no room for them. No one was able or willing to welcome them in and receive them. For over 400 years, Christians in Mexico have remembered this episode and reenacted it each year at Christmas. They call it the Posada. Its origins lie in a tradition started by Conceptionist monks visiting each other's monasteries, carrying large statues of Joseph and Mary. They would approach the massive wooden doors on the monastery and knock, crying out, "Is there a welcome? Do you have room for Christ?" Still today, this tradition persists. As Advent draws to a close, people set out from their homes bearing statues of the Holy Family. When they arrive at their neighbours, they knock on their doors. And they shout out, "Is there a welcome here? Do you have room for Christ?" Then the doors are opened wide and they enter with the Holy Family. This custom, this lovely custom, expresses one of the most significant truths of Christmas. Jesus Christ comes to dwell with us in our homes and among our families. He's not only to be found in the cathedrals or the great churches or the monasteries, but he makes his home in the ordinary places of life among us. In the words of Angelus Silesius, Christ could be born 1,000 times in Galilee, but all in vain until he is born in me. The Posada picks up on another of the most intriguing aspects of the Christmas story. As those most momentous of events took place at the first Christmas, the vast majority of people missed what was going on. The Gospels tell us nothing about the crowds of people who were meeting up with their friends for the census in Bethlehem. No, it's the shepherds, men who in that society were outcasts. They were the first to hear the good news. It's the mysterious magi, the wise men from foreign lands who make the journey and bow down with their special gifts to worship the Christ child. At the beginning of his gospel, St. John tells us, "To all who received him, Christ, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God." At the heart of the events of Christmas is the invitation to open ourselves up to God, to open the doors and to receive a gift. This, of course, turns upside down many people's expectations of Christianity, which they think is about commandments and rules and obligations, the very opposite of receiving something. But God still comes knocking on the door and asking, is there anyone within who will make space for Christ? For those who make space for him, there's a special promise that they'll receive a gift. He gave power to become children of God. But lest we lapse into pietism and retreat from the world and all its pain and suffering, and this year we've known much of that, we need to remember that when Jesus does come knocking on our door, he usually does so in the most surprising guises. Later in the Gospels, when Jesus returns and reveals himself to the righteous, they ask, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick and in prison and go to visit you? The King will say, truly I tell you, whenever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. We too can learn from the Mexican tradition of posada. In the midst of the busyness of our Christmas celebrations, we can open ourselves up, listening and expectant, so that we can make space and welcome Christ into our homes and into our lives. And when we receive him, the greatest of all Christmas presents, we will be transformed by his presence and his grace. Amen.